Welcome to our first Compost Cafe. I'm Christina, the communications coordinator at AdkAction. So if you don't know us, we're a nonprofit based in the Adirondacks, and we work on a number of different project areas that all seek to address unmet needs in the region, uplift our communities, and preserve the natural character of the Adirondack Park. Last year, Compost for Good joined us as a new project with a goal to keep nutrients in our communities through composting, which builds local resilience, heals soils, and helps reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. So we're doing our part on that front. Compost for Good founders John Culpepper and Katie Culpepper are with us tonight, and they're the compost pros, so I'm going to stop talking now and let them dive into our topic for the evening, Composting 101.
It's so great to have you folks join us tonight. This is an experiment for us. We hope it goes well, but we are absolutely passionate about composting and about building local resilience and reducing greenhouse gases. And I am John Culpepper, and with me is my daughter, Katie Culpepper.
I'm Katie. Thanks all for joining us. We're really excited to be here. We wanted to start this little presentation, and it will mostly be a discussion. We hope you've come with questions or best practices. It looks like we might have some issues hearing us. Can keep in the chats if you're having trouble hearing us. We are going to start today with a little video from Kiss the Ground. These composting cafes were inspired by a Kiss the Ground documentary screening we did in collaboration with the Wild Center. So we figured we would start this, our first Compost Cafe, with their short video called The Compost Story that gives a pretty good intro to composting. And from there, we'll start the discussion and try to answer some questions, and we'd love to hear from you all too. So Christina will share that video with us now.
That I will.
And I'd love to hear, are people still having trouble hearing us?
Give a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you, okay. I think thumbs up means good, so.
Great.
A banana peel and wondered, is that it?
All that time spent nurturing the banana and now it's just waste?
Could this humble peel serve a greater purpose?
Currently in the US, over 60 billion pounds of mineral-rich food material go to landfills each year. Imagine if we diverted those billions of pounds from the landfill and turned them into compost.
Imagine our cities, vacant lots converted into food forests. Imagine abundance everywhere.
And it can help reverse climate change.
But most likely, it won't. Why? Because we're insane.
We define waste as anything unused, unproductive, or not properly utilized.
But waste is a human invention. We're the only creatures on Earth who don't live a zero waste existence.
Yep, thanks to trillions of microbes that are in and around everything, including us.
Anything that lives gets repurposed and contributes to the growth of new life.
Some 500 million years ago, these microbes brought plants onto the land.
The microbes provided minerals and water in exchange for carbon sugars produced by the plants through photosynthesis.
This resulted in a terrestrial explosion of life.
More life meant more excretions and deaths, which meant more food and nutrients for decomposers, and all soil life, known as the soil food web.
This increased the abundance and biodiversity of ecosystems and turned barren land into fertile soil.
Today, composting mimics this natural upcycling process, transforming combinations of organic material into life-filled, nutrient-available organic matter.
Compost isn't just mulch, manure, or food waste on its own, nor does it stink. Compost has the aroma of the forest floor after a rain.
It also has superpowers. Compost can enhance food nutrition, increase crop yield, and strengthen plants' immune systems, all while increasing the soil's water holding capacity. And compost stimulates plant growth by bringing in microbial life, nutrients, and water-retaining humus to depleted soils.
More plant growth takes even more carbon out of the atmosphere. Microbes feed plants. Plants feed microbes, and the self-regenerating soil carbon pump cycles on, building soil.
Compost is a regenerative substance. It isn't just fertilizer. It's an essential microbial source, a probiotic for the land beneath our feet.
Now, while we've made some great progress recycling paper and even composting yard trimmings, currently in the US, over 50% of trash going to landfills is food scraps, paper, yard trimmings, and wood, all compostable materials. We are throwing away the very building blocks of life. Only 5% of our food scraps get composted. 5%. That means over 60 billion pounds of mineral-rich food material, much still fully edible. The weight of 4.5 great Egyptian pyramids go to landfills each year. And there it rots, creating methane gas, a greenhouse gas up to 86 times more potent than CO2. And it's not just food. Grass, leaves, and clippings, all designed by nature to fall back to the ground and increase fertility, are shipped miles to landfill. Now that's insane. Some city governments are finally stepping up by providing green bins to make composting more available, but too often they're misused. Toxic material, trash, is being mixed with the stuff we grow our food in. Just stop it! Don't put toxins or non-organics in that bin, please! Our current agriculture system robs our soils of carbon and biology, replacing them with chemicals, leading to more degeneration and desertification. We've broken the regenerative loop of life. It's crazy.
Without soil, life on land as we know it is impossible. And soil without life, it's just dust.
If the soil is being stripped of its life-giving qualities, what can help save our future? Properly made compost. The soil would be spongy again, retaining water and restoring our underground water supplies.
Fertile farms producing tastier and more nutritious food and no longer covered in toxic chemicals.
Imagine a farm to table to compost to farm system.
This is the regenerative system our future depends on. And doing it at home is easier than you think. You can at home? Use your green bin. If you for some reason don't have a green bin, request one from your city. Or find a neighbor or community garden who can use your compostables.
Cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and my hometown, New York, are leading the charge. Thank you.
Countries from Haiti to Australia are using compost to address food security and desertification.
Schools, hospitals, and restaurants are waking up to composting their food scraps.
Scientists and compost manufacturers are improving methods, making our superhero even more powerful.
Yes, life isn't over for the humble peel. Along with other organic material, it can help restore fertility to our soil, regenerate our food systems, clean our water.
And it can help reverse climate change. Really?
Okay, so what can you do?
Do all you can to support composting.
If we're to keep the planet habitable, human beings must participate in regeneration.
Each of us can play a role to help regenerate our planet simply by composting.
The cycle of this can make or break us. You choose.
Okay.
All right, so hopefully that got your brains thinking and your questions coming up. And I also hope that audio is a little louder. I increased our input a little bit more. So feel free to throw in the chat
With
there.
your physical hand, can you just raise it if we sound good on your end?
I see a,
Great.
I see a,
We see it down.
down. Okay, we'll try to speak up for you. So just a little brief background about Kiss the Ground, the organization behind the video that you just saw, we've been following along with them. They are out of LA and doing really great work around composting, but more broadly around soil health and agriculture out there. If you haven't seen the documentary Kiss the Ground, it is really well done about climate change and how agriculture and soil health fits into that bigger picture. We're trying to do just a little bit of that in the Adirondacks. We're a much smaller organization at Compost for Good, but we're working hard to try to promote composting in the Adirondacks in lots of different ways. And we want to take the next 45 minutes or so to hear from you all and the questions that you might have. I'm assuming we're coming in with all sorts of different experience with composting. For those of you who have your video on, show of hands for who is currently composting in some fashion. Yeah, and throw your video on if you want. Awesome. Yeah. Woo! Okay, and I think I saw everyone with their hand up. Maybe if you're not composting, you kept your video down. Hi, Nicole. So we want to hear from you if you have questions or if you have real success and a really good story to share about composting. We'd love to hear it in the chat. We do want to provide information, but we don't want to start from the very basics if that is not needed. So we'd love to hear from you the questions that you have around composting. And we do have some information and questions to get us started if we need them, but it looks like we've got some questions coming in. So from Alan, thank you for entering in the chat. And we can do one of two ways. This seems to be working well. Go ahead and write questions or comments in the chat, or there is a raise your hand. I think Christina wrote it out in the beginning slide. You can also use the raise your hand function on Zoom, which I admit I don't know how to do, but hopefully you're all better than I am at this. So feel free to raise your hand and we can actually do some interactive question and answer as well if needed. So Alan's first question is, in the North Country, on average, how many months of the year can you have an active compost pile for the average homeowner? Great question. We get a lot of questions about that because we have long, cold winters and things certainly slow down during the winter months. Do you want to go more into detail about that?
Be happy to. And we've done a lot of composting for a couple of decades at 2,200 feet in the Adirondacks at the North Country School Treetops campus. And we like to say that we're the highest elevation farm in the state of New York. We don't know whether that's true or not, but we say it all the time. And so if we can compost at 2,200 feet in the Adirondacks, anybody can. But it's really about thermal mass. So let me explain that just a little bit. In a pile of organic material, the goal is to create conditions, environmental conditions for the little fellas in there that do all the work, the microbes, primarily bacteria, but there are a lot of different microbes in there. Those microbes, each one are producing a tiny little bit of thermal energy. And if all of the microbes in that pile lose heat or thermal energy faster than faster than they can generate it, then your compost pile will cool down. So it's all about the size of the compost pile, or about doing composting in a temperate environment. So in your backyard, if you have a 4 foot wide by 4 foot deep by 3 foot high compost pile, it's going to go cold in the wintertime. Is that a problem? No, it'll heat back up in the spring months. But if you're really committed to trying to compost longer and longer, then make that pile as big as you can get it. Where we are, we've done compost in a lot of different ways. when we do static bay composting, our piles are really, really large, many, many tons of compost, of organic material, and it works throughout the winter time. And so we have, on our campus, we hit 30 below on a fairly regular, at least a couple of times a year each winter. And throughout the winter, we can compost just fine. In fact, there are many times where you can put your hand inside of a big pile of compost, even when it's 10 below outside, and it's so hot inside that you can't hold your hand in there. Now, that only happens if your pile is big enough. It's all about thermal mass. Great question.
Yeah, and to clarify, John did say this, but you can continue to add to a compost pile through the winter, even though it may not be actively breaking down. It's okay to continue to add to it. That will kickstart it when it starts to get warmer. Then you will have more mass, and you will have more effective, efficient composting once the temperatures reach the right way. We get a lot of questions about the drums, the small tumblers that a lot of backyard people have. That is not enough thermal mass to keep any kind of composting going through the winter. So that's just something to know if you're living in the North Country and you're trying to compost on a small scale.
We have invented a fairly large tumbler. Ours is 4 foot in diameter and 20 feet long. And in that drum, we can compost all winter long. But in the smaller drums that you see in backyards, they will cool down when the weather gets cold enough.
We have a question from Holly Wolf, who messaged me because she didn't see the reaction for menu. But Holly, you are unmuted if you want to ask your question. We can't hear you. You can't hear us. Oh, well, that is no good at all.
No, I can hear you. I can't hear Holly.
Well, the problem is we've got two people that look like me. And so one of them is Marcia Stanley, and she is asking the questions. And Marcia, you need to unmute in order to ask the question.
I thought we weren't supposed to do that.
We don't have that many people on, so I think it would be lovely if when you're ready to ask a question, just unmute yourself.
God damn, what a great idea.
I think that's fine.
It might be chaos, but let's do it. So Holly Wolf or her counterpart. Sorry,
the fake Holly Wolf.
Let's hear the question.
Marcia, go ahead.
I have wanted to compost for years, but we have a lot of bears around our camp. I'm a seasonal resident. I don't have questions about the winter composting, which you were addressing quite well, because I'm not there then. But I have all kinds of company and a huge amount of waste products in the summer. And my fear is, how do I keep the bears and the animals out of it?
I would love to address that. We've got bears, we've got lots of dogs, we've got lots of critters who would like to eat the food waste in the compost. Obviously, if you can compost inside of some sort of a structure, that's ideal. If you don't have that, there are, and you may or may not be interested in this, but there are pretty simple, inexpensive electric fences that you can rig up. You will see them at state parks very often around their dumpsters, and they operate in a variety of ways. But they can operate on just a battery and a single strand of wire that runs around the compost area. And if there's enough charge on that wire, a bear or a dog, once it learns, will not go back again. So we have a lot of electric fences on our campus as well. So if you have a very specific question about that, feel free to reach out via email, and I can help you with that. But that's probably the only way that you're going to really keep bears out of there if the bear really wants to get into your compost pile.
So from a conservation point of view, is it better for the earth that I do it myself by fencing off a composter? Or is it better that I put out the buckets that I've read about weekly to be picked up, where it goes to maybe a farmer somewhere? What gets more bang out of it?
That's a great question, and I think it depends on what you want out of it. If you're really looking to enrich the soil in your yard, you want to keep that organic matter there. If you are simply interested in doing something that's environmentally better, then the collection system is really good. And by the way, if you're not familiar with what she is talking about, two friends of ours in Saranac Lake, Carter and Bill, have begun a compost company, and they are collecting from businesses and from residences, and they make it pretty easy. And if you're at all interested in that, you can go to their website. Their company is named
Blue Line Compost.
Blue Line Compost.
And they have some pickup drop-off locations. They make it pretty easy for people who don't have the ability or don't have the time or interest in doing it on your own property. A quick note about the electric fencing. This kind of system is used a lot for beekeepers in areas where there are bears. And so if you have farms near you, if you know beekeepers, they have good experience keeping bears out of small areas. Bears would go for honey or compost if they can get them. I see there are a couple questions coming through, but I also saw a raised hand from Beth Reed.
Hi, thanks.
Hi, Beth.
Hi, good to see you. Oh, okay. I teach all day, a class of 30 on Zoom, so I've got the reactions down. So I just had a two-part question. Yes, I have been using Blue Line Compost, and they're great. I was also wondering, obviously staying home and cooking a lot more, it's like you go through those so quickly. Are there any public facility drop-offs, perhaps like in the spring and summer at a farmer's market we could connect with, or opportunities to have public drop-offs anywhere, or places where we could just drop off our scraps ourselves? Because I'm also interested in not just my own food scrap collection, but helping the community and getting the word out there and sharing. And sorry if I can squeeze in a second question. I hate when my students do this, but I'm gonna do it. About demystifying compostable materials, because we get so many questions about, oh, but our coffee cups are, compostable, and that's great if you're putting them in a compostable process. If you put it in your garbage bag or can and goes in the landfill, there's really no benefit. So that was my second part.
Those are great questions, Beth. I'll attempt the first one. The DEC has a site where they list every compost facility in the state. And they list most of them. They don't capture all of them. And if you go onto their website and look at that, it's amazing how there are compost facilities all around the Adirondacks, but on the DEC website, there are no compost facilities in the Adirondacks. That's not true because Blue Line Compost, but the point is there are very, very few compost facilities. More will be coming as more people realize the value, both the economic value and the environmental value in composting. So I'm sure of that, Beth, but right at the moment, we happen to live in an area where there are not a lot of opportunities for community drop-off. But we are in the business, Katie and I and our co-founder, Jen Perry, of trying to create more sites. So hopefully, if we do our job well in the next several years, you'll see more and more facilities like this.
And if you are interested, if you're a community organizer or passionate about compost like we are, if you go onto the AdkAction website, you can get some information about the composter, the community scale composter that we have come up with. And we are really, really excited about getting more of those out into Adirondack communities. Take some capital to get them in, but a place like a community garden or someone who's excited about it in their backyard could be a really, really good place to bring community together, to have the capacity to do more composting within the park, to keep resources close.
And we can help you do that.
Yes. And Beth, depending on where you live, I would always take food scraps in my small compost. But we can connect later about that. So Beth had one other question, and I want to address that. And I see a lot of hands coming up and chat questions. If people who are writing in the chat, it seems like we're now moving to this format, which might be easier. If you're comfortable just getting your voice in the mix, that would be great. Otherwise, we can try to keep coming back to the chat feature as well. Beth, your second question was what?
About compostable, where?
Compostable products.
Great question. And something I think about a lot. Compostable materials are compostable. They are not going to compost very well in a landfill, which is where a lot of those products end up. They'll go through the same process as food scraps in a landfill, and that is not doing much good for anything. And without a pretty sizable commercial scale composter, they don't break down very well in backyard composting either. If you're on your own personal compost system, if you tear them up or shred them somehow, if we're talking plates, they will break down better. But ultimately, they don't break down super well unless you're in a pretty industrial system. I've done a lot of experimenting with soaking plates and things like that and tearing them up, and it's a lot of work. So better to use reusable goods when you can, and try to seek out industrial composters when you can. Do you have more to add to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out on the market. Fortunately for all of us, there's an organization called the Biodegradable Products Institute, BPI. They've got a great website. They are in the business of researching all of the compostable products out there, figuring out which are more compostable than others. But quite simply, any starch-based material is going to take a long time to break down in a backyard composter. We've got a commercial or a community scale composter, 4-foot diameter, 20 feet long, and we have difficulty breaking those materials down. If you go to the product, the manufacturer, they will tell you that it needs high temperature environment for up to 60 to 80 days in order to really fully compost. So unfortunately, there are a lot of those products out there, and many of them are simply going to the landfill.
Okay, I'm gonna Phyllis had a question about, hi Phyllis. Question about layering leaves on top of organic waste to keep odor away, which is a good time to talk about carbon material going into your compost pile to improve your composting. So yes, always good to layer in. Leaves would count as a carbon material, wood chips, shavings, anything like that. There's a lot, you can get pretty bogged down with ratios, but a general rule of thumb for me in creating a really good, efficient composting pile is to just always cover your food waste every time you're adding, completely cover that with some kind of carbon material. So if you have access to leaves, perfect. If you have access to straw, not as ideal, but anything like that, or lots of little ripped up compostable plates, that could be in there as well.
Yes.
I hope that answers that question. Feel free to keep raising. Phyllis, does that answer your question? I I saw you.
Yes, thank you very much, because we were a little bit concerned because sometimes it seems like we end up with a lot of leaves. We are getting good compost. Our organic waste is breaking down and we're getting nice, good black compost, but it seems like we have a lot of leaves. So I don't know if we're doing too much, but we're really concerned about, because we do live, like I said, rurally, and we are concerned about animals getting in. But so far it's been working, you know, to keep them away anyway.
Well, if you're getting good compost, Phyllis, you're doing the right thing. There are a lot of different ways to compost. All of them are good as long as you're getting, what you get in the end product is something that smells like the forest floor. If that's what you're getting, you're doing the right thing. Keep doing that. And by, as Katie says, layering on the top any kind of organic material, it keeps the smells down, keeps the flies down. It won't necessarily keep dogs and bears out because sometimes they can smell that through the organic material, but certainly helps.
And another point to make on that, you can just pile up layering greens or nitrogen-rich material with the carbon, and that will break down eventually. If you are able to rotate that, so flip the pile every little while and kind of mix the material together, then cover with carbon, the more you're aerating and flipping, the faster that will happen and the better breakdown you'll see. So if you have I don't know if you have a pile or if you have bins, but if you can just kind of flip the whole thing over every couple of, once a month in the summer, you'll get good results that way.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. That's really helpful.
Thank you, Phyllis. All right. Feel free to raise your physical hand. Marcia. And
I have a question. I live 5 minutes from the Wild Center, which has what I think is a state-of-the-art composting operation. And I have wondered if they are having problems in the current pandemic situation because there aren't enough restaurants and food waste from schools, I fear, to feed your machinery. And I wonder if there's any way that local residents who live nearby could help, like particularly in the summer, by taking things there to be added.
Well, that's very nice of you to think about that, and you'd have to talk with them directly, but they are operating one of the composters that we designed, and they are not operating optimally right now. In other words, they could utilize more food scraps than they're currently getting, but they would be the best people to answer that question. But
thank you.
But that machine that they've got can easily accommodate 40,000 pounds of food scraps per year. So they're certainly not doing that at the moment.
No, a lot of the Wild Center is taking food, or in better days is taking food from the Tupper Lake schools. All of our composters right now are somehow connected to schools, and the reason that they're not
in restaurants, the Wild Center had wanted to also accommodate restaurants.
Yeah.
Right, and because of COVID, a lot of that has been delayed or is just more complicated. In schools, there's a lot of pre-packaging, and it's less conducive to it. So hopefully, as things brighten, generally composting will also. But we encourage you to reach out to the Wild Center and see if they have the capacity to take food scraps from you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That would be great. Douglas Daly, I saw a hand up a little while ago.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to remember a few points I was going to make. I do backyard. I hesitate to call it composting because it's just a static pile. I dump it in a bin off the back of the porch. It just sits there. So, and I think, John, you were saying to somebody you said, if you're getting the material you want, then you're doing okay. So the only other ingredient I would add to that, in the summertime, make sure you water it. And then in the third the other ingredient would be a lot of patience. So I characterize what I do as more like long-term decomposition, mulching, as opposed to composting. So I should have said, by the way, I'm at SUNY ESF. I'm a professor of environmental resources engineering. And so I've been looking at composting for a number of years at a commercial scale, but also trying to figure out this community scale collection process. And I know somebody asked a question, I think it was Marcia actually, who said something about, well, which is better? Is it better for me to do it at home or drive it someplace and drop it off or have it picked up? And yeah, Marcia, that's like what we deal with is there's not just the economics, but there's the life cycle. And to be honest, I'd love to see everybody, I'm in Syracuse, but I'd love to see everybody do backyard composting because that's the lowest energy input. Just carry it out to the backyard, put it in, and it's very decentralized energy input to make it happen. But in urban and in your rural environment. So I want to let y'all know your voices are being heard. But it's a huge challenge to do collection when your collection points, residential in particular, but even your commercial, are, you know, a quarter mile apart sometimes, and you're 20, 30 miles from the nearest kind of centralized processing facility, whether it's at the Wild Center or whatever. So the other thing I'm involved with right now, ESF and DEC are working together. We have a memorandum of understanding. My graduate student, Grace Anderson, is on the call with us. She's somewhere in the mosaic here. And the main thing we're focused on initially is whether we can, in New York State, start incorporating, sorry, I have a 7-month-old kitten that is demanding attention from me, tearing my house apart right now. But we're trying to see if we can incorporate, in addition to continuing to divert food scraps from landfills, we're looking at what we are calling non-recyclable papers. So there's a lot of paper that gets picked up in blue bins, but doesn't actually enter the recycling stream for various reasons. There's also a whole slew of paper that doesn't go into the blue bins. And we're also looking at that to see if we can use that as a carbon feedstock in commercial scale composting facilities. So we presently have, Grace is taking the lead on a project at ESF where we are composting food waste along with, sorry, cat's climbing the curtains now. Along with non-recyclable paper, and we're trying different things. We're trying different ways of improving the composting operation. And I'll just close with this also. So Grace graduated from ESF as an undergrad in my engineering program, stayed on to study with me. We are about to embark on a senior capstone project. I hesitate to, you know how it is, I don't want to drop names right now, but we are working with a central Adirondack community to look at what we can do in that community. And John, I think your system is, you know, like one of those things that's going to be looked at by the seniors in my capstone design class. So we have 7 engineering senior students that are going to be looking at this at a community scale, everything from Marcia, you know, seasonal residents and where, you know, where they live to a couple of different possible locations within that community, and trying to figure out what are the obstacles we have to overcome, and money is obviously one of them. But can we do this, and can we keep the darn bears out of it too? So John, I appreciate your comment, because I hadn't gotten to that point in thinking, but electric fences, great idea. So the students are definitely going to be recommending electric fences around their composting facility this coming spring. But yeah, we're going to be looking at a lot of different things this spring. So your voices are being heard, and I really appreciate the chance to participate in this and find out what's going on at the grassroots level in your Adirondack community, because you're the ones who are going to drive the decisions. I mean, I firmly believe engineers can come into a town, and doesn't matter whether it's rural America or a third world country, we come in, we do the wrong thing, and we leave, it's not going to work. So I'm here to listen and to validate that the things I think people are concerned about, you're actually expressing, and so far so good. So appreciate that.
Douglas, thank you for your comments. Grace, thanks for your work on this. I'd love to connect with you at some point.
Absolutely.
You make such a good point, Douglas. There are so many organic materials out there. We're focused on food scraps primarily in tonight's talk, but we are passionate about upcycling all organics, and all organics should be put back into the earth in a form that rejuvenates the soil. The very idea that we're putting almost any type of organic material in a landfill, I think in 20, 30, 40 years, we're going to look back and we're going to think, what on earth were we thinking? That was the dumbest thing ever. We're taking valuable resources and we're paying to throw them away. And at the same time, we're buying in inputs for our gardens, our farms, our forests. It's crazy. So well done, Douglas. Thanks for your work. Love to connect with you at some point if you are interested.
Thank you. I'm on the web, SUNY ESF.
Right.
Engineering.
Other questions?
Okay.
And again, you feel free to just chime in if you would like to unmute yourself.
I think we see a hand raised.
Yeah, and there are a couple of questions in the chat as well that we can go for, but let's go with Lisa.
So my question actually kind of comes back to this idea of the carbon layering, and also composting with like non-living sources, I guess you could say. So I just live in a small house in the suburbs. So in the fall, I hoard leaves as much as I can because I have a lot of, more green items in the summer when, you have like food is in season and crop shares and gardens are going. So I have a lot of food scraps then. And so it's sometimes hard to balance it with leaves because I can only have so many on hand before I run out before the next fall. So I've heard that you can introduce carbon and browns into your pile with shredded cardboard and, paper that has soy-based inks on it and stuff like that. But I guess my question is there a point where you're adding not leaves as a brown, but like, non-living kind of cardboard and other stuff and paper that it becomes like non-beneficial because you're lacking nutrients from sources that were once living? I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yes.
like I've kind of wondered that as I'm like putting more and more and more paper into my pile because I don't have ready access to leaves until they fall off the trees again.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lisa. Just keep in mind, organic simply means it contains carbon. And so that cardboard, that paper was once inside of a living tree. So, and not many people realize it, but most of the nutrients in a tree is in the twigs and in the leaves. The rest is primarily carbon. So the sawdust, wood chips, wood shavings, whatever is commonly used.
What about newspapers?
Newspapers these days now, some may disagree, but as long as in this day and age, the inks in newspapers are primarily just fine. They're primarily soy-based. Somebody please correct me if you think I'm wrong. 20 years ago, when we were really looking into this, we tried to stay away from highly colored advertisements because sometimes you'd find non-soy-based inks in there. But these days, by and large, newspapers, from my perspective, are just fine. And to answer your question, anytime you aren't seeing the results you want to see, something's out of whack, whether it's you've got too many greens, too many browns. But if you take the long view, like Douglas suggested, and if you're not in a hurry, then pretty much any organic material that you put in a pile will eventually break down. It doesn't necessarily have to get hot. And in fact, cold composting or composting from fungi and from worms and things like that is just fine. Creates a perfectly usable product. It doesn't have to, you know, if you read and you get a little bit anxious about your pile isn't heating up enough, as long as it's not stinking, as long as it's producing good quality stuff that smells good, you're doing the right thing.
And another note about leaves or carbon in general is that there are a lot of people who are paying money to have their leaves hauled away to go to the landfill. I got like 40 bags of leaves from a woman in Lake Placid this summer because she was otherwise going to pay to landfill them. So connecting with community members, sometimes transfer stations or dumps will have wood chips or leaves for free for the taking for anyone who is interested. So there may be sources of carbon that are free that might be available to you in your community, depending on where you are. Or there might just be neighbors who are like, "What, you want my leaves? Yeah, great,
Yeah.
take them." So I have a question here from Janet. Can I move compost into my garden soil even if I can still see a few recognizable food scraps in it? How important is it to freeze or shred my scraps before I put them in the pile to potentially speed up the breakdown? Do you want to take that?
Well, it's a number of questions there. Why don't you tell your experience about top dressing? But let me just address the freezing thing. Mostly what freezing does is it breaks a lot of cell walls and it does speed up the process a little bit. But there's absolutely no reason why you have to put your food scraps in a freezer to freeze them. You can, doesn't hurt. It speeds up the process a little bit, but.
And there was one other question ahead of that one from Yvonne about when food waste isn't picked up as often as you would like for it to, what you can do with that food scraps to cut down on odor. And some people, if you have room in a freezer, do freeze their food scraps for that purpose. So food scraps go in the freezer. You know, if it's a once a week pickup, then or once every 2 week pickup, then you don't have food scraps starting to break down on your counter. So there's an example where if you have the space in your freezer where freezing might be a good option, just to answer another question in there.
Can I, so I'm down in Rockland County, and so our group is trying to start a community composting where if people, so like I live in a co-op, so I'm in an apartment, so I really don't have freezer space, and a lot of people in our building don't have freezer space. So just trying to work with sort of the building management, and we have a lot of apartment buildings around here, to convince people to put some sort of space aside where residents can store the compost until it can be picked up, and concerns with the building management about, odors and pests, and what sort of, arguments or evidence can we talk to use to sort of say this isn't really going to be a problem.
So just make sure that whatever you're doing, that you're not being offensive to your neighbors. So when food scraps are in a bucket, 5-gallon bucket, for example, if flies can get in there, they will, and they will lay eggs and they'll create maggots. I assure you they will do that. So making sure you have a lid that is tight prevents that. It doesn't prevent the smells, but once you open the top, but that's okay. You just want to keep the flies out of there. But anyone who composts can take food scraps, no matter how broken down they are. But back to the question about having a little bit of food scraps that you can see that aren't fully decomposed. Always a good idea to fully break down your food waste if you can. As long as there's not a lot of that material on the ground to draw flies or to create odors, that's okay.
And the nutrients in that material is more available to if you're looking to put it onto your garden, the more broken down it is, the more available those nutrients are to the plants. Otherwise, they're still locked up in those food scraps. So if you're looking for best bang for your buck in the garden, finished compost is better. If you're looking to clear out your compost pile because you want to start new, then you certainly can put it out there. It's just not going to do as much good. It will continue to break down out there, but just not as quickly.
Great.
Hopefully that answered that question. Feel free. We have not very much time. Oh, Martin.
Yeah, I have
Hi.
some questions about raw materials in building, building compost piles, that is. First of all, this dichotomy between green and carbon materials, I wonder if that's sort of false. After all, carbon is the backbone of amino acids and proteins and cell walls and everything that we're putting in there that's basically organic, just like sort of the plant-based plant-based eating, you know, people, well, that's, you can't get protein from there, but everything in those plant-based cells, to put in a pitch for that, is protein, just like it is in animal cells. There's no difference. So that'd be one comment I have about that, and I'd appreciate your response. The second question I had is about burned products, ash from either fireplaces or barbecues, which presumably would have very little carbon in it.
Right. So I'll tackle the first one. You're absolutely right. Anything that anything that can be eaten can be composted, and you can go down a rabbit hole with ratios of browns to greens, recipes, how many pounds of this to how many pounds of that. The reason why it is important is that you want to optimize the conditions for the little microbes that break everything down. As long as you're mixing your pile in such a way that it isn't creating a lot of off odors. For example, if you did nothing but food waste and no carbon, then it's going to go anaerobic on you and it will begin to stink. It'll break down, but it may not be ideal for you. So you're perfectly okay if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you want to just pile up a bunch of food scraps, but it will draw flies and it will go anaerobic and it will stink. But eventually it'll break down and it'll form really beautiful stuff, but it will take a while. Adding a little carbon in there makes things just much nicer.
And just a really quick for any very beginners out there, when we're talking about greens and browns or nitrogen and carbon, one thing to help if you're confused about what fits into what, this is what I used to teach kids, so forgive me for how rudimentary it is, but a good rule of thumb is if it sits on your counter for a week and starts to break down, that's a green. And if it is stable on your counter, a leaf is not going to break down, right? So if it's stable on your counter, then that's a brown. That's a very whatever, but that's a good rule of thumb to think about when you're trying to figure out what fits into what category.
I love that. And Martin, back to the ash. Ash is a very, very basic substance, high pH substance. So I would go easy on the ash in a compost pile. You can certainly add it, but you can over add ash. If the pile is big enough, it'll accommodate quite a bit of ash from your fireplace. And you're absolutely right. That contains very little carbon. It contains primarily minerals from that exist in the wood after the wood is burned. Minerals and other things like that, but it is a pretty high pH material, and so if you're not very experienced with it, go lightly on the wood ash until you get a sense of whether that's a good thing for your compost pile or not.
And for those who are more advanced in their composting, and if you're looking for carbon in that burned wood material, there's some really cool research going on about biochar and adding that into compost, and how that what impacts that has on soil. So that's something to look into if you're interested.
But you're not going to get
What is biochar?
Right.
Sorry, Marcia?
What is biochar? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, that's another rabbit hole you can go down. Biochar is a fabulous, wonderful thing that has been around for centuries. It comes as a result of burning carbon material in a low oxygen environment. By and large, you're not going to run across biochar unless you buy it or unless you are sophisticated enough to make it. I wouldn't worry about it. It's cool stuff, but most homeowners aren't going to ever come across biochar.
Unless you make it yourself. I see a request with just 2 minutes to go. I see a request to talk about worms. Do you want to do a really quick? And if we have not answered a burning question, please feel free to throw it in again. And just for those of you who are not following on the chat, a little bit more about ash. Beth Reed says Blue Line does not accept ash. What else can we do with it? Douglas, good comment. He manages ash separately, spread it lightly across gardens and lawns. It is good. It's great to put it back. Don't throw it away. It can be sprinkled on lightly on gardens. It can be used minimally in compost, as John said, or across lawns. So thank you for that, Douglas, and for your question, Beth. And worms really quick, and throw into the chat if there's anything last minute to ask.
So worms, there is another style of composting called vermicomposting. It's done with a specialized worm called a red wiggler. They're not native to the Adirondacks. And so if you're interested in vermicomposting, in other words, breaking down your food waste in your home, which is quite possible, in your living room, we've done it with red wigglers. You can do that. It takes a little getting used to. They don't break down as fast. They don't break down material as fast as compost systems do. But vermicomposting is fabulous stuff. If you're into red wigglers, great. The worms that you find in your compost outside, those are native worms. And you will find worms will always get into your compost once it's finished, once it gets down to a point where the large organic materials are broken down. And so allowing those worms to go through your compost is a fantastic way to generate worm castings and to add value to your compost.
I would throw something in there that it's my understanding that worms of all stripes are not native to northern United States, and that there have been a number of studies showing loss of biodiversity in areas where, like, fishermen drop their worms. And there's also this new invasive of the last few years that we've got, the Asian jumping worm, which I have read doesn't even have the benefit of having nutritious casts. So I have cold compost. I stick my hand in there and I'm always disappointed that it's not very warm. But since I stopped adding worms to it, I used to, if I found a worm digging around in the garden, I'd throw it in there. Since I stopped doing that, I have not found naturally occurring worms in there. Of course, it's raised above the ground and there's some plastic underneath it to sort of preserve moisture. But my 2 cents would be not to encourage people to encourage worms in their compost.
Well, there you have it from Martin. Thank you, Martin. We appreciate that. It is now 7:31. We are more than happy to stay for another couple of minutes, or I am anyway, if you're willing and you've got some questions that you just really want to ask. Christina, is that okay to stay another minute or two?
Sure, it is. I also, I've copied all of the questions from the chat. So any that we didn't get to, I'm going to put together into some of our compost FAQ. But if anyone has any last minute compost questions, I'd also like to take a moment and I'll just screen share this just in case anyone wants to write this down. But so our next Am I sharing? Yep. So we have 2 more compost cafes coming up. They're every other week. So next is January the 25th, and we're going to be talking about compost systems from backyard to commercial. But of course, there will also all compost questions will be welcome. And then on February 8th, our 3rd and final for now compost cafe series of the winter is community scale composting. Make it happen in your school or community. And I believe we will have some student guest speakers as well, talking about their successes in composting at their schools, and how you can make that happen. So do make sure that you have those on your calendar. Are there any more last minute compost questions before we go?
Just a thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, let's all
Yes.
take a moment and
Can I
maybe
talk? Can you
unmute if
hear
you
me?
want. Oh,
Wait a
yes,
minute.
yes. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, someone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
We
can.
can hear you.
Okay. I just want to say thank you. It's absolutely fantastic show.
Thanks.
Wonderful
Let's
production. Wonderful people, comments, everything. And my big thing is the red wingers. I got a box of them from a friend from Lake Placid 40 years ago. And I have them in my compost
Red
for
Wigglers.
40 years.
Yeah, yeah.
The red wingers.
Okay.
They are everywhere. They don't, they show up. I have them in big containers. I have them in the ground, in compost. I've compost every different way you can imagine. I'm in the middle of Saranac Lake Woods. So
Fantastic.
anyway, so if you can get a hold of them and I think what you said about them using them interior, in a basement or something, I think that's where they originated. And I was given them and I didn't know, I just put them outside. And they just been thriving for 40 years. I hope they still
Everyone,
keep going.
thank you so
And
much.
thank you again. Wonderful.
Yes, thank you all.
Wonderful.
And if everyone wants to join me in unmuting and giving a round of applause to thank John and Katie for their time. Thank you so much for having us and for hosting this. I really learned a lot. And you all have a great evening too.
And Alex, it said to share, and I was going to say, if anyone has questions, we can put our email in the chat, and anyone can. We are available and want to talk compost all the time, so feel free to reach out to us with more questions or comments or whatever if you're interested.
Great.
And Christina already put our email in the chat. She's good. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.